So I hope you enjoyed that. I think it's a little funny myself. But of course, at the end of that second clip, the couple was actually probably a little drunk from having to drink all the ouzo with the Greek family. But I love that idea of when they're drunk. I think it also gives you the idea of culture shock, because sometimes culture shock can feel the same way. You feel woozy, like nothing's straight, everything's a little catty corner, a little crazy. Maybe a little bit similar to the experience of being tipsy from drinking too much ouzo. So when you encounter a culture that is so different as that older couple, the parents of the groom did, with this Greek family, sometimes you come out the other side with feeling totally knocked off balance. So the symptoms of culture shock as defined by Oberg are in the next slide. First, strain as a result of the effort that is required to make necessary psychological adaptations. So basically, you can expect to feel tired. Feeling tired is one of the big symptoms. A sense of loss and feelings of deprivation in regard to friends, status, profession, and possessions. So you've left everything, your friends, family, and your home behind, and you're grieving the loss of that. Rejection by or rejection of the members of the new culture. So you might feel that they don't accept you. Perhaps you can't communicate with them. You can't really share on a deep level with them. Or you also might reject them. And this is a symptom of culture shock. You might not like them. Fourthly, confusion in role expectations, values, feelings, and self-identity. I know that in my experiences in another culture, especially learning a language, I felt very confused in my role. I graduated from college, I got a master's degree, I'm generally an intelligent person in American culture, but when I was in the Middle East learning Arabic, I spoke like a 5-year-old. And that was only after a few months of practice. So it's very confusing to go from feeling like an intelligent, contributing member of a society to feeling like everything is difficult, you can hardly communicate very basic needs. This causes a great confusion in your own identity. Fifthly, surprise, anxiety, even disgust and indignation after becoming aware of cultural differences. And sixthly, feelings of impotence as a result of not being able to cope with the new environment. So you feel like you can't get anything done. The easiest things take much longer to do. So, to simulate culture shock, I want you to find a piece of paper or a napkin if you're in a cafe, wherever you're watching this, find something you can write on and a pen. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is write your name with your right hand, or whatever your dominant hand is. If you're left-handed, write it with your left hand. Like that. This is what it's like to be in your home culture. Now, take your pen and move it to your non-dominant hand. Okay? Now, I want you to write your name. Okay, now do it again. Now do it one more time. I'm going to try really hard this time. I'm not sure if I got a better result trying really hard. But how did that feel? It feels really strange. It's something that's really easy to do when it's your home culture, your dominant hand, something that you don't even think about. It's completely different when you're in a different culture, like writing with your non-dominant hand. You feel a little bit silly. You don't feel very smart. I feel like my writing looks like the writing of a 3-year-old. I think. What if somebody looked at that? They would never think that someone who got a master's degree. So just doing something simple, like writing your name, or paying your phone bill, or going shopping at a grocery store and finding all the groceries that you want, becomes more difficult when you're in a different culture. So I want you to think about the symptoms on a more practical level. Ober gave us the more academic language for these symptoms, but on a practical level, the symptoms look like homesickness. You really want to go home. You miss your friends and family. Boredom. Because it's difficult to engage people on a deep level there in that culture, you might not be able to engage them at all, and then you're just bored. Withdrawal. Because of the inability to engage others, you might withdraw, want to keep to yourself, just watch your DVDs or watch YouTube in your own language, just stay in your bedroom. Needs for excessive amounts of sleep. You might want to sleep longer than normal when you're visiting another culture or living in another culture. Compulsive eating to comfort yourself. Irritability, stereotyping of the host nationals, unexplainable fits of weeping, physical illnesses even, and a loss of ability to work effectively. All of these are just practical symptoms of culture shock. Now, the stages of culture shock. On the next slide, we have the stages. When you first arrive in a country, the first stage, of course, is you're feeling really high. This is the honeymoon phase. Right? Everything's beautiful. You really enjoy it. Everything's fascinating. That might last a few weeks if you're there long term. If it's a shorter term trip, a lot of these stages get compressed into the length of the trip. Might last a few months, but slowly you'll go down and you'll be like, oh, this is getting harder and harder. You'll experience the stressors, you'll experience the exhaustion, and you'll start to enter into culture shock until you crash. This is hostility, the big crash. And then if you keep at it, after crashing, you'll head back up, you'll recover. But if you're there for any length of time, more than 6 months or so, you will often experience a second crash. Until finally, you become comfortable in the culture. And you understand how to navigate the culture, how to live life, even how to speak. You make friends. You begin to feel at home there. So I really have appreciated a way of remembering these using the letter F. So honeymoon is fun. And then as things get difficult and confusing, you have flight. You withdraw, you run away from the culture. Until it gets so bad you want to fight. You're angry at the culture. And then if you keep engaging people and keep working through things, you sleep, you treat yourself well, you'll get to a place where you're fit. Then you might have another little downturn and crash, another flight and fight, until finally you become really fit in that culture. Now, If you've done any cross-cultural travel for any length of time, you know what this is. You've probably experienced this yourself. I want you to take a moment and consider that all of our international students go through this. And this is a big element of why they're so grouchy some of the time. Especially when you get, for any given international students, when you get in about 3 or 4 months into their time in the U.S., you should know you're about to hit this. If they suddenly get grouchy, this is probably where they're living. Okay, so a few distinctive features of culture shock. First of all, it's not caused by one event, but the entire culture, the entire spectrum of doing things that's around them. It's constantly questioning the validity of their own decoder ring. So if a student comes in from China and they have their Chinese decoder ring for culture, and constantly it's not working, people aren't responding the way they expect, over a period of time, not suddenly, but cumulatively over a few months, they'll hit culture shock. Okay, some of the causes of culture shock. First of all, loss of cultural cues. For example, what does a smile mean? Here in the United States, a smile talk is generally that it's friendly. It's a way to engage someone in friendship, whether you know them well or not. In other cultures, you would never smile at someone who is not already your close friend. This is something that several of my international students have said this semester, that in America you smile at everybody, but in China you don't smile at someone unless you're already close to them. Also, smile in some cultures means I'm embarrassed. Okay, so if you see a international student smiling because they've just made a big mistake in class, and then they're smiling and you wonder why they're smiling, it's because they're embarrassed, and that's how they express it in their culture. Why is my teacher angry when I don't look her in the eyes? I'm sure you've all experienced this. You've had international students who won't look at you, and you really want them to interact with you, but if they come from a neutral culture where expressing emotion physically and outwardly is a sign of disrespect and is taboo, then you can understand why it's so difficult for them. And actually avoiding your gaze might be just a sign that they respect you, that you are someone of higher status than them, and they know that in their culture it would be bad to look you in the eye. No one here understands my jokes even when I translate them. Imagine how frustrating that would be if you were from another culture and you were the class clown in your home high school, and you come here and nobody gets it, and you just get funny looks every time you try to tell a joke or explain something that you think is funny. Also, ambiguity of living situation. So I have 2 examples here. 1, I sprayed the shower water all over the bathroom. Why did my host mom freak out? Well, if you've been to Asia, you might have noticed that most bathrooms are completely tiled in. The entire room is covered in tile. And basically the entire room is the shower. So you can spray water everywhere, because that's what it's for. That's the purpose of the room. But if an international student from Asia were to come here and spray water all over the nicely, newly painted, decorated walls of their host mom's bathroom, you can understand what kind of a clash you would get into. Why do I always have to check in with my host parents? Back home I was independent. I had another student this semester who said that back home she lived in an apartment by herself at age 14. And her parents would check in on her occasionally, but she was really on her own. She went to school, she made her own meals, she saw her parents on weekends. And so for her, being in the environment of Cascade, living with a host family where she needs to constantly check in, tell them what she's doing, what she's up to, is a pretty big cultural jolt for her. So that the living situation is ambiguous. Also, having your own values brought into question. This is particularly difficult at Cascade, where we teach the Bible, we teach Christian values very prominently, and a lot of our students don't have any Christian background. So that's another strain or another stressor. And finally, having to always function well without knowing the rules. This is really challenging for our students because we want them to get the assignments in, do the tests, get good grades, but sometimes it's very difficult when they don't know what's going on, if it's not been clearly communicated to them, or the English is just moving faster than they can follow. Another sort of little example of that is if you're in a classroom and you ask a student to give an answer, but you very quickly move on if they don't answer right away. You know, for an international student, they might know the answer. It's just going to take them a little bit longer to get it out of their mouth because they have to translate it into English. And they also might be nervous and not very confident in doing that. So they're trying to function well, they're trying to function highly, but they're still learning the rules, and it's very difficult in this environment. So all these things, lots of cultural cues, ambiguity of living situation, the values question, and having to function highly all contribute to culture shock and bring it on. And it only takes a few months before, boom, you hit rock bottom. A few more examples of cultural cues is on the next page. I always think it's interesting to think about just simple hand signals. For example, this is one of my favorites. I use this in ESL class all the time so that my students know they got something right. And in America, it's definitely something good. And in a lot of cultures, it means something good. But in the Middle East, it's very offensive. So if you have any Middle Eastern students, be careful of using the thumbs up. This one, for Latin American students, this is very offensive. This one, which we would think is offensive, right? That doesn't seem very nice. In Argentina, it's actually a pretty neutral statement. It means, I don't know. This one, in Argentina, if someone came up to you doing this, you might think, why are they calling me crazy? What's their problem? But actually, they're just saying, you have a phone call. Come to the other room. Come take the phone. You have a phone call. In Africa, this one, we might be saying wait or stop, or we might be asking for a high five, right? Well, in Africa or some countries, it means your mom had 5 husbands, and therefore you are an illegitimate child. So, not a very nice hand signal in some parts of Africa. In Germany, to knock on a table is a way of expressing applause or appreciation. In the Dominican Republic, you might see someone do this to you and think that they're coming on to you, but they're actually just pointing. Instead of their fingers, they use their lips to point. And finally, in South Africa, if you see someone do this, they might be praying or they might just be saying thank you. So, if you come into a culture and you are interpreting cues, even like these simple hand cues, and misinterpreting them, they add to the cumulative effect of being kind of just completely overrun with all these different messages that you can't decode with your own cultural decoder ring until you get exhausted and you lapse into flight and finally to fight. Okay, so this brings us to your first assignment for this lesson. It's in the next slide. Assignment 3A, I want you to just think about the international students that you have taught at Cascade. Have you seen them exhibit the symptoms of culture shock? And would you please write 300 words, describe a few students whom you've seen go through these symptoms and how you sought to respond and help them?